What happens when you die? How did you acquire your personality, and what happens before birth? Exploring these questions gives rise to a great truth and meaning of life itself. These questions must be explored if we are to discover who and what we really are and what we are doing here. That is, transcendent spiritual beings that are experiencing physical life and an individual personality, in contrast to the oneness of the highest spiritual plane at the source, the Most High. We are experiencing separateness. The meaning of life, then, is to be independent of this source for a time and return the intangible lessons and truth we uncover back to it, not as the innocent spiritual babe that we began as, but as a spiritual master. This is the meaning of salvation and what is truly meant by the term ascension. I'm sure we've all heard the term seven heavens or the seventh heaven before. It is an ancient concept that refers to the life beyond, but few understand it beyond that. To cut right to the chase, it was understood by the ancients that before birth the soul descends downward through these seven rings, as they're called, and after death begins to ascend upward through the same spheres, as they're also called. You may ask yourself, though, why bother descending in the first place? Why leave the state of being with all, one with God? Well, we call this process involution, which is most definitely required in order to experience our true potential in our spiritual life to come. Speaking on this, Thomas Burgoyne states, "The processes of creation are dual and consist of involution and evolution. The one is inseparable from the other. Paradoxical as it may appear to the uninitiated, it is nevertheless a divine truth that the evolution and ultimation of spiritual life is accomplished by a strict process of involution, from the without to the within, from the infinitely great to the infinitely small, basically from God to the material to the physical." Now, these heavens are each governed by a planetary body, or the energies associated with that body. For this reason, we refer to them as the seven governors. They are the Sun and the Moon, Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn. They are also referred to as the Elohim, and are represented by the seven-pointed star, the septagram. They are of prime importance regarding the life beyond, which is why we have 7 days in the week, 7 notes on the musical scale, 7 energy centers or chakras, 7 deadly sins, 7 virtues, 7 archangels, etc., etc., etc. So as the soul moves through these 7 heavens before birth and after death, it thus moves through the 7 different energies of these 7 governors. To really understand the concept of the 7 spheres of the afterlife, or 7 heavens, one must first come to a spiritual understanding of the 7 primary celestial bodies of astrology. From the 7th heaven to the 1st, from the top to the bottom, the order is Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the moon being the governor of the closest heaven to the earth. So Thomas Burgoyne, in reference to the energies of the governors, states, Saturn absorbs that attribute of energy whose action expresses itself as coldness, and thus produces a nature that is slow and meditative, solitary and reserved, melancholy and repentant. It can be a scheming energy in some cases. Note that we do have an adjective for this energy. We've named it very appropriately, Saturnine, meaning slow and gloomy. So think about that for a moment. What do you think came first? Someone just randomly said, what word should we come up with that means slow and gloomy? I don't think he'd pull the word Saturnine out of his butt. That's way too specific. Or did he have some sort of knowledge of astrology and said, I want to create a word that describes a person that has the energy of Saturn. I'll call it Saturnine. I honestly see no other way that could have happened. This force corresponds to the blue ray of the spectrum. Jupiter absorbs a totally different energy than the Saturnine and radiates an influence at once jovial or jolly, a happy medium between the fast and the slow, the meditative and the thoughtless, the isolated hermit and the one too easy of access. The influence is cheerful, generous, benevolent, and sheds light and love upon all material surroundings. It's also, being the energy of generosity, it can give you wealth. Similar to the word Saturnine, we have an adjective that describes this energy as well. Again, jovial, which comes from the alternate name of Jupiter, Jove. Also note the expression, by Jove. This force corresponds to the purple or indigo ray of the spectrum. Mars absorbs an energy which is the polar opposite of Saturnine as far as speed goes, and therefore radiates an influence which is sharp and energetic, thoughtless, masculine, intrepid, and fierce. Saturn being slow and meditative. It is destitute of either fear or timidity, an influence which is free with everything and everybody. Briefly stated, the force of the planet Mars is fiery, imperious, combative in the first degree, bloodthirsty, and unrelenting. And again, we have words reflecting this. What practice or sport do you think best describes this energy? How about martial arts? Or just the word martial in general? This energy, of course, corresponds to the fiery red ray of the spectrum. The sun retains and radiates the principle which is at once life-giving and dignified, just as Jupiter is a compound or happy medium between the energies exerted by Saturn and Mars, so the sun sends forth an influence which is the happy medium between Jupiter and Mars. It is affable but majestic, proud but gracious, and blends firmness with kindness, ambition with paternal consideration, combativeness with self-respect, and liberality with discretion. This influence corresponds to the orange ray of the spectrum. So it's like these are your noble leader types who have this energy in their personality. Venus absorbs an energy which is totally different from any of the preceding and radiates the love element of nature. This influence is warm and impulsive interiorly, but externally cool and moist. Consequently, pliable and receptive, clinging and feminine. This is the energy which ever yields to a nature more positive than its own with loving submission. Hence the myths of the friendships between Mars and Venus. As far as words go, we have venereal disease. Sorry. This energy corresponds to the yellow ray. Mercury absorbs an energy which in a general sense appears to be a compound of all the other planets of the spectrum put together. Hence, he has been well designated as the messenger of the gods. It's basically representative of all of them. The specific action which this orb radiates is purely intellectual. It is quick and active, intuitional and enterprising, careless, volatile,